Welcome to Single Mom Survive and Thrive. Just me plus 3, and we're living our best life. I am very excited to introduce my very good friend, fellow single mommy, Esme, to my first episode entitled Making the Decision to Leave. Making the decision to leave your significant other is no easy task whatsoever. I wanted to make sure I took this episode to really talk about it, especially with somebody who I know has walked through this similar journey to me and is a single mom, and it's not an easy journey and it's not an easy decision to make. I wanted to make sure that the first episode was dedicated to this because whoever's out there, if you're single or you're not, and this is more towards the people that are considering being single and you have children. Maybe you have a spouse or a significant other, you're not happy, you want to leave, and you're debating whether it's possible. So this episode is dedicated to discussing that topic with a very good friend of mine. We're both here. We're both in the same boat. I've known her for a long time. How long have we known each other for? 5 years?
About 5 years, yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say it's about 5 years.
So I want to introduce my very good friend here. Her name is Esme, and she's going to just give a little intro about who she is. And welcome, Esme, to my podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Well, hello.
By the way, cheers. We're cheersing to single mom life with some champagne in hand.
Cheers. Let's take a sip to that. Yeah. Cheers.
Let's do that.
Delicious. This is some type of rosé, right?
Rosé champagne, yes.
Oof, I love it. Wow.
So Esme, tell everybody about who you are and why you're here, and also a little bit of your backstory and journey about being a single mom.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I want to say congratulations on your first episode.
Thank you.
Super exciting. And thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I know you and I have a lot of personal conversations, so so I appreciate the fact that we're here today, having this conversation and sharing it with all of the single mommies out there, or all of the women out there and men, regardless of whatever their situation is. If this conversation can resonate, then that's wonderful. So obviously you already introduced me by name. My name is Esme, and I'm also a single mommy of 3.
3 kids. We both have 3 kids. That is a lot for one person to handle.
It is definitely a lot, but it is wonderful. So absolutely love being a single mommy of 3. I'll start off by saying that. So a little background on me. I became a single mommy about 5 years ago. Actually, when we met, I think
that was the beginning of the end for you.
The beginning of the end, yeah. I think at that point I was already considering divorce, and you and I had a lot of conversations about it, and I was very hesitant at the time. But I'll give you a little bit of background before we get into that. So I met my ex-husband when I was 19. I was in college. He was my boss. He is a couple of years older than me. He's a wonderful person. I'll start off by saying that. He's an amazing man. When I met him, I was working full-time. I was in college full-time. He just kind of swept me off my feet. He was the type of man that was like, what do you need? How can I help you? I'm here for you.
Basically, every 19-year-old's dream.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Who wouldn't want that at 19? Not to say that you weren't mature enough to make your choices, but that's a dream come true.
Absolutely. Sure. Another thing to keep in mind is that I had been working since the age of 13, and this is actually a story that I've shared with you.
Yeah.
I had been working since the age of 13. I grew up with a single mom, so I was basically, contributing to the household at a very young age. And so when
I just stop you right there, because it's interesting that you say that, since obviously this is by single moms for single moms, this whole podcast. So you were raised as a single mom. I want to talk about that a bit more later because I wasn't, but that's interesting that you say that your experience being raised by a single mom matured you so quick.
It did. It absolutely did. And
we will talk more about that later in this podcast.
Yeah, and we can elaborate more on it. But I think one of the things that it really taught me was independence. And believe it or not, when you're making the decision to leave, being independent is one of the things that you'll have to, think about.
Yeah, right.
Things that you'll have to consider. So anyway, we'll get more into that later. But so when I met my husband, he was accomplished, he was established. He was successful, and he offered something that my entire life I was lacking, which was security. I felt safe with him. I felt comfortable with him, and he loved me very, very much, and he expressed it. And so when I met him, it felt like a safe haven. Is that the appropriate word to use?
Yeah.
Like a safe haven. And
a good option if you're looking for a family and a future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good option.
Yeah, a good option. And he supported me with everything that I was doing at the time. Like I said, I was a college student. So I, was swept away by it all. And we ended up dating for about a year, and then we became engaged, got married, and had our first child at the age of 21, when I was 21.
Oh, wow.
Had our second when I was 23. And then he was a wonderful man throughout our entire marriage. And then a couple of years into the marriage, I realized that something was off. Something wasn't right. Mm-hmm. I loved this man dearly, and here's where I'm going to explain why I chose to move forward with my divorce. I loved this man dearly, but something was lacking, and I couldn't quite pinpoint exactly what it was initially. And at the age of maybe 26 or 27, at that age, I feel like you're a little more mature. You've gone through enough life experience to understand things from a different perspective. So at that point, I realized the type of love that I have for this man is not a romantic type of love. And I'm sure that's a whole nother episode of its own.
Yeah, very much.
It wasn't a romantic type of love. It was, the type of love that you would have for someone that, like, father your type of love.
That is another episode in its own.
Yes.
What you just said.
Yes.
But
yes,
I mean, I'm no doctor, but that just sounds classic daddy issues. So, I mean, it's true. We go for we'll adjust that one down the line.
It goes back to what you were saying, growing up with a single mama.
Right.
Yeah. It all comes full circle.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So I walked away from the marriage.
So what year did you guys get together, and what year did you separate?
Oh, that's a good question. I think we got together in 2006, and we had our first child 2008, and then we separated 2016, 2015. I might be a little off. We were together for 10 years, married for 8.
Oh,
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So the similarity that you and I both have is I was also in a relationship with my ex for 10 years. We were only married for 6, but we were together for 4 years prior to that. So you were married you were together for 10, and you walked away at that point with 2 children. How old were they?
I had a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old at the time.
Yeah. And the interesting was, when I left, my 2 girls were 6 and 8. Mm-hmm. My son, of course, was younger. He wasn't quite 2, but a lot of similarities. I know we definitely connected a lot, and at least relating to each other in that sense.
Absolutely.
Because those ages there's no great age to tell your children you're separating from their, other parent, but those ages were, unique and difficult.
Absolutely.
Very, very hard for them. So, okay, so you talked about your story and how, so I appreciate that, and sort of your reason why now you're here. How long have you been a single mom for?
Well, that's where it gets exciting.
Stage 2. Stage 2, if you like. So now, where did that third gift come from, Esme?
Oh, man.
And how long have you been single? So fill us in until that point to now. Just fill us in and sort of a little bit of your stage 2 journey, if you will.
Yeah. So I would definitely call it a stage 2 journey. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to describe that. Yeah. So when I divorced, there was obviously towards the end lack of intimacy in my relationship. Mm-hmm. Again,
common, right?
Can we make that
usually
another
the case?
Yeah. Can we make that another
episode?
Yeah.
There is episodes for days of these topics. Definitely.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's some lack of intimacy. So when I left my marriage, obviously, immediately right after I walked away from my marriage, I started dating. I met a few people, and I had some fun. Like, I was married when I was 19, and late 20s, here I am, divorced, not having experienced much in life in terms of partners and relationships. So I would say that I was really craving, that lack of intimacy that I had in my marriage. So I went out and I dated and I had fun. And long story short, I met someone that I ended up falling in love with. That's where stage 2 began for me. This was about a year after my marriage. We ended up dating and getting pregnant. And, we moved forward with the pregnancy, and we had the most beautiful, baby ever. A couple of years into that relationship, no, a couple of months into that relationship, not years, months into that relationship.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. It was intense.
It was intense.
If I recall,
it was intense. We dated for a couple months. We got pregnant right away. We moved in together right away.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew better. And from the very beginning, I had expressed this to you. I knew at that point that it could not work out. It was his first child, and he was moving into a household where we already had two. I also live with, or my mom lives with me.
Let me just interrupt real quick to everybody that's listening. At that point, you had already moved into a new house with your mom living with you and your two kids from your previous marriage.
Yeah.
They would go every other week with their dad, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
He moved in with you towards the end of the pregnancy, or?
Towards the end.
Right.
Yeah, so I actually went through the pregnancy on my own, because he had his own space, and, he was working in school, busy, doing his thing still at the time. So I went through the pregnancy on my own, and then towards the end of the pregnancy, he moved in with me. We had some issues, and ultimately, a couple months into our relationship, maybe a year into the relationship, we decided to end things. So once again, single mommy.
Baby number 3.
Baby number 3.
Yes.
Once again, single mommy, and
gift number 3.
Gift number 3.
I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one, both of them were extremely difficult. The first one was a 10-year relationship, but I knew I wanted out at that point. The second one, I didn't want out. I was extremely in love.
It was in its infancy stage, technically, right? Yeah.
And I had a 1-year-old. So that one was tough. They both were.
No separation when kids are involved is easy. In fact, that's not even a good word. No separation with kids involved is not tough. Everything is really tough. Extremely tough when there's kids involved. Separations are bad without kids. And those of you out there that's separated from anybody knows what I'm talking about. If you try to do it with a kid, it is just so difficult. Just the choice, because that these children's lives are impacted forever on this decision to separate. It's tough.
It is very difficult on the children. Yeah. And in fact, that's probably when you are deciding, or making this decision to leave, that's probably the number one factor, your children.
Exactly. I have a question for you that I want to get your perspective on this for everyone that's listening. If you could tell Esme 5 years ago any advice, one thing that you wish somebody could have told you 5 years ago when you were thinking about leaving your first husband, your original first choice to leave. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. A 2-part question. Your first relationship, the one that you decided to leave, and that was your first most impactful one with your 2 kiddos. If you could sit in front of Esme then and say one piece of advice that you could have really needed to hear, what would you say? And then let's also, the second part to that question is, what would you have told Esme a year later when, although that was a really different situation, but if there's one piece of advice you could tell you or anyone that's thinking about leaving, what would you say?
So 2 answers to that. First off, I would start off by saying that leaving, divorce, is just as difficult as you think that it's going to be.
I agree.
It is difficult. It is not easy.
Nope.
I remember speaking to you and just other women and men who had gone through divorce. I remember hearing that. It's going to be really difficult. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, right? You've heard that. So first thing that I would say is that if you can stay in your marriage, that if you can make it work, especially when there's children involved. If there's no abuse, that's physical, mental, sexual, whatever it might be. If there wasn't any cheating, some people still choose to make it work after cheating, and that's fine,
Right.
But, if there wasn't any of that, the advice that I would give is try to make it work, and if both people still want to be together, you're still both invested into the relationship, I would say try to make it work.
But to that point you just made, if both people are invested, obviously if you're deciding to want to leave somebody, somewhere something broke, someone's not invested. But your point is, even when it's broken, try to do every single thing you can do and exhaust every single avenue before you choose to leave, because you have children that are going to be impacted immensely. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. This is advice that I know your question was, if somebody, what was your question? If somebody would have given you advice?
Yeah, somebody said to you at that time, I mean, I know I said things to you, but if you could really sit and rehear the advice, there's something